I am Isabella Chen, and 6 months ago, I was living in a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat, surviving on instant noodles and the occasional gallery opening's free wine and cheese. My parents had spent 23 years telling me that my paintings were nothing more than expensive hobby materials turned into colorful garbage. Then the Metropolitan Museum of Art called with an offer that changed everything forever. The smell of turpentine and acrylic paint has been the backdrop of my life for as long as I can remember. While other children collected dolls or played video games, I was mixing colors on makeshift palettes, trying to capture the way afternoon sunlight filtered through our kitchen window. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My parents, David and Margaret Chen, never understood this obsession. To them, art was something you looked at in museums during rare cultural outings, not something their daughter should waste her life pursuing. Growing up in suburban Denver, I was the middle child caught between two very different siblings. My older brother Michael was the golden boy, graduating summa cum laude from Colorado State with a business degree before landing a prestigious job at a consulting firm in Chicago. My younger sister Sarah followed a similarly practical path, becoming a registered nurse and marrying her college sweetheart right after graduation. Then there was me, the dreamer who spent hours sketching instead of studying calculus, who chose art classes over AP courses, who saw the world differently than everyone else in my family. My father owned a successful accounting firm, the kind of steady, respectable business that had provided our family with a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. He understood spreadsheets, tax codes, and profit margins. What he couldn't understand was why his middle daughter insisted on wasting time with paintbrushes when she could be learning valuable skills that would guarantee her financial security. My mother, a retired elementary school teacher, was more supportive in theory but constantly worried about my future prospects. She would pat my head affectionately while simultaneously suggesting I consider teaching as a backup plan. The first major clash came during my junior year of high school when I announced I wanted to attend the Rhode Island School of Design instead of applying to state universities for business or education programs. The family dinner table became a battlefield that evening, with my father's voice rising to levels I had rarely heard before. "Art school is not an investment in your future, Isabella," he declared, cutting his pot roast with perhaps more force than necessary. "It's an expensive way to postpone growing up. You'll graduate with a pile of debt and no employable skills." My mother tried to mediate, as she always did. "Maybe she could study art education, David. She could teach and still do her painting on the side as a hobby." The word hobby hit me like a physical blow. Even my most supportive parent couldn't see my art as anything more than a recreational activity, something to fill spare time after handling real responsibilities. I tried to explain that art wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. When I painted, I felt connected to something larger than myself, something meaningful and true. The colors spoke to me in ways that words never could, and through my brushstrokes, I could communicate emotions and ideas that otherwise remained trapped inside my head. My father wasn't impressed by my passionate speech. "Feelings don't pay rent, Isabella. Dreams don't put food on the table. I've seen too many young people waste their 20s chasing artistic fantasies only to end up bitter and broke by 30. The compromise we eventually reached satisfied no one. I would attend the University of Colorado and major in something practical like communications or marketing, with a minor in studio art. I could continue painting as much as I wanted, but I needed to build skills that would lead to stable employment. At the time, it felt like a victory. Looking back, I realize it was the first time I allowed other people's fears to influence my artistic path. College was a strange period of internal conflict. During the day, I sat through lectures about consumer behavior and brand management, dutifully taking notes and completing assignments that felt meaningless to me. But every evening, I escaped to the art studios, where I finally felt like I could breathe again. My paintings from this period were moody and restless, full of sharp contrasts and hidden symbolism that reflected my own emotional state. I was creating some of my best work while simultaneously preparing for a career that would take me away from creating entirely. My art professors recognized something in my work that my family couldn't see. Professor Elena Rodriguez, who taught advanced painting techniques, pulled me aside after class one afternoon during my sophomore year. Her own paintings hung in galleries across the Southwest, and her opinion carried weight in the regional art community. "You have a unique voice, Isabella," she said, studying the canvas I had just finished. "There's something raw and honest in your work that you can't teach. It comes from somewhere deep inside, and that authenticity is rare." I felt a surge of validation hearing those words from someone whose artistic judgment I respected. But when I shared Professor Rodriguez's comments with my parents during our weekly phone call, my father's response deflated my excitement immediately. "Of course your professor is encouraging, honey," he said with the patient tone he used when explaining obvious things to confused clients. "That's her job. She's paid to make students feel good about their work. But the art world is incredibly competitive, and even talented people struggle to make a living." My mother chimed in with her usual concern. "We just want you to have security, Bella. We've seen how difficult life can be for artists, and we love you too much to watch you struggle unnecessarily." Their words came from a place of love. I knew that, but love mixed with fear often creates the kind of protection that stunts growth. Every time I started to believe in my abilities, their practical concerns would creep back into my mind, making me question whether I was being naive or realistic about my artistic potential. The summer after my junior year, I decided to test my skills in the real world by applying for an internship at a small gallery in downtown Denver. The Meridian Gallery specialized in contemporary regional artists, exactly the kind of venue where I hoped to show my work someday. When they offered me the position, I was thrilled to finally be working in an environment where art was valued and respected. Martha Stillwell, the gallery owner, was a woman in her 60s who had spent decades nurturing emerging artists. She had an eye for spotting talent before the wider market recognized it, and several artists she had championed early in their careers had gone on to achieve national recognition. Working under her guidance was like attending a master class in understanding art as both creative expression and viable business. During my first week, Martha walked through the storage room where dozens of paintings waited for their chance to be displayed. She paused in front of a series of abstract landscapes by an artist named Thomas Wright, pieces that had been painted 15 years earlier but were only now beginning to find an audience. "Art has its own timeline," she told me, running her fingers along the edge of one canvas. "Sometimes the world isn't ready for what an artist is saying, and sometimes the artist isn't ready for the world. The magic happens when those two things align." I spent the summer learning everything I could about the business side of art while continuing to paint in every spare moment. Martha allowed me to hang one of my pieces in a group show featuring local emerging artists, and when it sold on the opening night, I felt a rush of possibility that I had never experienced before. Someone I didn't know had seen something in my work worth owning, worth living with, worth investing in. When I called my parents to share the news, their reaction was more muted than I had hoped. My mother congratulated me warmly but quickly shifted the conversation to practical matters. "That's wonderful, dear, but don't let it distract you from your regular coursework. You still need to finish your degree and something marketable." My father's response was even more deflating. "It's nice that you sold a painting, Isabella, but one sale doesn't make a career. Did you make enough to cover the cost of your materials and the time you spent creating it? Artists need to think like business people if they want to survive." His questions were valid from an accounting perspective, but they missed the point entirely. The sale represented validation of my artistic voice, proof that my work could connect with strangers and communicate something meaningful. The financial aspect, while important, was secondary to the emotional significance of that first transaction. As I entered my senior year, the pressure to choose a practical career path intensified. My parents arranged informational interviews with family friends who worked in marketing, public relations, and communications. Each conversation followed the same pattern, well-meaning adults explaining how I could use my creativity in corporate settings while building a stable foundation for my future. The problem was that every time I tried to envision myself in an office environment creating advertisements for products I didn't care about, or writing press releases for companies whose missions felt meaningless to me, I felt a deep sense of dread. My art had always been my way of processing the world, of making sense of complex emotions and experiences. The thought of relegating it to weekend hobby status felt like agreeing to suffocate a vital part of my identity. During winter break of my senior year, I had what I can only describe as an artistic breakthrough. I was home for the holidays, working in my childhood bedroom that had been converted into a makeshift studio, when I began a series of paintings exploring the theme of family expectations versus personal truth. The pieces were intensely personal, incorporating symbols and imagery from my own life while addressing universal themes of identity and belonging. The paintings were unlike anything I had created before, bolder and more confident in their execution. I was experimenting with mixed media, incorporating found objects and unconventional materials that added texture and depth to the traditional painted surfaces. Each piece in the series built upon the previous one, creating a visual narrative about the struggle between conforming to others' dreams and pursuing your own path. When I showed the completed series to Professor Rodriguez, her reaction exceeded my wildest expectations. She stared at the paintings for several long minutes before speaking, her eyes moving from canvas to canvas as if she were reading a compelling story. "This is the work I've been waiting for you to create," she said finally. "You've found your voice, Isabella, and it's powerful. These pieces need to be seen by a wider audience." She arranged for me to have a solo show in the University Gallery, my first exhibition featuring exclusively my own work. The opening reception was better attended than I had dared to hope, with students, faculty, and several local art collectors mingling throughout the space. I stood in the corner, nervous but exhilarated, watching people engage with my paintings in ways that confirmed they were communicating exactly what I had hoped. My parents attended the opening, along with Michael and Sarah, who had both driven to Denver for the event. I watched them move through the gallery space, studying my work with expressions I couldn't quite read. My father spent a long time in front of the centerpiece painting, a large canvas that depicted a figure caught between two different worlds, one representing security and conformity, the other representing risk and authentic self-expression. After the reception ended and we were cleaning up, my mother approached me with what I thought might be a new understanding of my work. "The paintings are very interesting, dear," she said, choosing her words carefully. "You've certainly developed your own style." I waited for more, hoping she would share some insight into how the work had affected her emotionally, whether she had recognized any of the personal elements I had woven throughout the series. Instead, she shifted into practical mode, the default setting she used when confronted with situations outside her comfort zone. "Have you given any more thought to graduate school?" she asked. "An MBA could really complement your artistic background, give you the business skills you'd need if you want to work in arts administration or museum management." My father joined the conversation, having finished loading my paintings into his car for transport back to my apartment.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"The turnout tonight was impressive," he acknowledged. "You've obviously worked hard on these pieces, but now it's time to focus on transitioning from student life to the real world. Companies value creativity, but they need employees who understand how businesses actually operate." I realized then that they hadn't really seen my paintings at all. They had looked at them, certainly, and had probably recognized my technical skill and the time I had invested in creating them. But they hadn't engaged with the content, hadn't allowed the work to communicate its intended message about the cost of abandoning your authentic self in favor of others' expectations. The gap between my artistic vision and my family's understanding felt wider than ever that night. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my childhood room, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I was going to pursue my art seriously, regardless of my family's concerns or society's expectations. I would find a way to make it work financially, but I would not compromise my creative integrity to fit into someone else's definition of success. Graduation approached with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I had completed my communications degree with respectable grades while simultaneously building a portfolio of work that represented my artistic evolution over 4 years. Professor Rodriguez had written me a glowing recommendation letter for graduate school applications, but instead of applying to MBA programs as my parents hoped, I had secretly applied to several prestigious Master of Fine Arts programs. When the acceptance letter from the San Francisco Art Institute arrived, I knew I was facing the most important decision of my young adult life. The program was exactly what I needed to develop my skills and make connections in the art world, but it would mean 2 more years of financial dependence on my parents while pursuing a degree they considered worthless. The conversation when I told them about the MFA acceptance was one of the most difficult we had ever had as a family. My father's initial reaction was pure disbelief, as if I had announced my intention to join the circus or become a professional gambler. "You applied to graduate school without telling us," he demanded. "After everything we've discussed about the importance of building practical skills, you want to spend 2 more years playing with paintbrushes." My mother tried to find middle ground as always. Maybe she could defer for a year, David get some work experience first, and see how she feels about art after dealing with real-world responsibilities. But I had reached a point where compromise felt like betrayal of everything I believed about myself and my potential as an artist. "I'm 22 years old," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "I need to make my own decisions about my career path, even if you disagree with those decisions." The argument that followed was painful for everyone involved. My parents felt hurt and confused, but I would reject their guidance after years of supporting my education. They couldn't understand why I would choose uncertainty and potential struggle over stability and security. From their perspective, they were trying to protect me from making a mistake that could impact the rest of my life. From my perspective, they were asking me to abandon the one thing that gave my life meaning and purpose. Art wasn't just what I did, it was how I understood myself and my place in the world. Giving it up to pursue a conventional career would mean living as a shadow of who I was meant to be. The standoff lasted for weeks, with both sides becoming more entrenched in their positions. My siblings tried to mediate, with Michael suggesting I could always return to art later in life after establishing financial stability, and Sarah proposing that I could pursue art therapy as a compromise between my creative interests and practical concerns. Finally, my parents issued an ultimatum that forced me to choose between their support and my artistic ambitions. They would continue to help with my expenses if I pursued graduate school in business, communications, or another practical field. But if I insisted on attending art school, I would be financially on my own. "We can't support decisions we believe are harmful to your future," my father explained during what would be our last conversation on the topic. "Sometimes loving someone means refusing to enable choices that will hurt them in the long run." I packed my belongings and moved to San Francisco with less than $3,000 in savings and no safety net beyond my own determination to make my artistic dreams work. The city was expensive and overwhelming, but it was also full of creative energy and opportunities that didn't exist in Denver. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood that art wasn't just a hobby or a phase, but a legitimate way of engaging with the world. My MFA program was intense and transformative, pushing me to question assumptions about my work while developing new techniques and conceptual frameworks. My fellow students came from diverse backgrounds and brought different perspectives to our shared exploration of contemporary art practices. Our professors were working artists themselves, people who had found ways to balance creative integrity with practical necessities. During my first semester, I took a seminar called Art as Social Commentary with Professor David Kim, a Korean-American artist whose installations had been featured in major museums worldwide. His work addressed themes of identity, displacement, and cultural memory through mixed media pieces that combine traditional and contemporary elements. "Art has the power to change how people see the world," he told our class during one particularly memorable discussion. "But only if artists are willing to take risks and address subjects that matter to them personally. Safe art is forgettable art." His words resonated with me deeply, affirming my decision to pursue work that emerged from my authentic experiences rather than trying to create pieces I thought would be commercially viable. I began developing a series of paintings exploring the immigrant experience in America, drawing from my own family's history as well as interviews with recent immigrants I met throughout the city. The work was emotionally challenging to create because it forced me to examine aspects of my identity that I had previously taken for granted. My grandparents had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s, working multiple jobs while learning English and navigating cultural differences that my American-born parents had never fully understood. Through my paintings, I tried to capture the complexity of existing between cultures, the sense of belonging nowhere completely while carrying pieces of multiple worlds within yourself. Financial survival during graduate school required creativity and resourcefulness. I worked part-time at a frame shop, learning valuable skills about presentation and conservation while earning enough to cover basic expenses. I shared a tiny apartment with 2 other art students, sleeping on a futon in the living room to keep rent affordable. I ate a lot of rice and beans, shopped at thrift stores, and learned to stretch every dollar as far as possible. Despite the financial stress, I had never been happier or more motivated. Every day brought new challenges and discoveries, whether in the studio working on my latest series or in seminars discussing the role of art in contemporary society. I was finally living as an artist, not just dabbling in art while preparing for something else. My relationship with my family during this period was strained but not completely severed. We spoke occasionally on the phone, conversations that carefully avoided the topic of my career choice, while focusing on safe subjects like the weather and family news. My parents would ask vague questions about my classes, and I would give equally vague responses, both sides stepping carefully around the elephant in the room. The breakthrough in my artistic development came during my second year when I created a series of large-scale paintings combining traditional Chinese landscape techniques with contemporary American urban imagery. The pieces explored themes of environmental destruction and cultural preservation, using symbolic elements from both traditions to create visual conversations across time and space. Professor Kim was enthusiastic about the series, recognizing it as a significant evolution in my artistic voice. "You're creating something genuinely new here, Isabella," he said after reviewing the completed works. "These paintings couldn't have been created by anyone else, because they come from your specific cultural and personal experience. That authenticity is what makes art powerful." He recommended me for several group exhibitions in San Francisco galleries, and my work began attracting attention from collectors and critics. The positive response was encouraging, but more importantly, it confirmed that I was developing a distinctive artistic perspective that could contribute something meaningful to contemporary art discourse. As graduation approached, I faced another crucial decision about my future direction. I had several options. I could try to find gallery representation in San Francisco and build a career as a West Coast artist. I could return to Denver and attempt to establish myself in a smaller but more affordable art market, or I could take the biggest risk of all and move to New York City, where the art world offered the greatest opportunities along with the greatest challenges. My final graduate exhibition was a major success, with several pieces selling to private collectors and one painting acquired by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art for their permanent collection. The museum acquisition was particularly meaningful because it represented institutional validation of my work, recognition that my paintings deserved preservation and study as part of the contemporary art record. When I called my parents to share the news about the museum acquisition, their response revealed how little their opinion of my career choice had changed despite my academic and professional achievements. My mother congratulated me warmly but quickly added, "That's wonderful, dear, but what are your plans for supporting yourself after graduation? Museums don't pay artists very much, do they?" My father's reaction was more direct. "I'm glad you've had some success with your paintings, Isabella, but it's time to think about building a sustainable career. You could use your art background in advertising or design work while continuing to paint on weekends." Their inability to understand that museum acquisition was a major professional accomplishment, equivalent to a business graduate landing a position at a prestigious consulting firm, highlighted the fundamental disconnect between their values and mine. They could only evaluate success in terms of immediate financial return, while I was thinking about building artistic credibility and cultural impact over the long term. I decided to move to New York City, using my savings from graduate school sales to cover the deposit on a small studio apartment in Brooklyn. The city was even more expensive and competitive than San Francisco, but it was also the center of the international art world, the place where careers were made and artistic movements were born. My first year in New York was a constant struggle between poverty and possibility. I worked multiple part-time jobs to cover rent and basic expenses, teaching art classes at a community center, working weekend shifts at galleries, and doing freelance illustration work for small publications. Every spare moment was devoted to creating new work and building connections within the art community. The paintings I created during this period reflected the intensity of my New York experience. They were larger and bolder than my previous work, incorporating elements of street art and urban decay that I encountered daily while navigating the city. I was developing a visual language that combined my Asian American heritage with contemporary urban culture, creating pieces that spoke to the complexity of modern identity in global cities. After months of persistent networking and studio visits, I finally convinced Marina Santos, who ran a well-respected gallery in Chelsea, to include one of my paintings in a group show featuring emerging artists. The exhibition, titled New Voices, was designed to introduce collectors and critics to artists who were beginning to develop distinctive voices, but hadn't yet achieved wide recognition. The opening reception was intimidating and exhilarating, filled with people whose opinions could significantly impact my career trajectory. I stood near my painting, trying to appear confident while internally terrified that no one would respond to the work. But as the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in serious conversations with collectors, curators, and fellow artists who seemed genuinely interested in my artistic perspective. A review of the show in a prominent art magazine singled out my painting for particular praise, describing it as a sophisticated meditation on cultural hybridity that avoids both exoticism and assimilation. The review was brief, only a few sentences, but it represented my first coverage in a publication that was read throughout the international art world. More importantly, the exposure led to studio visits from several serious collectors who were interested in commissioning work or purchasing pieces from my existing inventory. For the first time since leaving home, I began to believe that I might actually be able to support myself through my art without compromising my creative vision. But success in the art world is never linear or predictable, and the momentum from the group show didn't immediately translate into financial stability. I continued working multiple jobs while developing new bodies of work, always balancing the need to create pieces that pushed my artistic development forward with the practical reality of needing to sell work to survive. During this period, my relationship with my family reached its lowest point. Our phone conversations became increasingly infrequent and strained, with long silences filling the spaces where understanding should have existed. My parents saw my continued pursuit of art as stubbornness and immaturity, while I experienced their lack of support as a fundamental rejection of who I was as a person. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult financial period when I was behind on rent and struggling to afford art supplies. In a moment of desperation, I called home asking not for money, but simply for emotional support and encouragement. Instead, I received a lecture about the consequences of impractical life choices and the importance of accepting reality. "We love you, Isabella," my father said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "but we can't keep pretending that your art experiment is going to work out. It's time to come home, get a real job, and stop wasting your talents on something that clearly isn't sustainable." The conversation ended with both sides feeling hurt and misunderstood. I hung up the phone, knowing that I was truly on my own, that my family's support was conditional on abandoning the path that felt most authentic to me. It was terrifying but also liberating, removing the last external pressure to compromise my artistic vision in favor of conventional success. Over the following months, I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity, creating pieces that were more personal and experimental than anything I had attempted before. Without the weight of family expectations, or the hope of their eventual approval, I felt free to explore subjects and techniques that truly interested me rather than trying to create work that might seem more acceptable to people who didn't understand contemporary art. The series that emerged from this period of creative freedom would eventually become the foundation of my first solo exhibition, and ultimately the collection that would change my life forever. But at the time, I was simply a struggling artist in Brooklyn, painting by day and working service jobs by night, driven by nothing more than the deep conviction that art was not just what I did, but who I was meant to be. 3 years into my Brooklyn life, I had developed a rhythm that balanced survival with artistic growth.
My studio apartment doubled as my workspace, with canvases leaning against every available wall, and the constant smell of oil paint mixing with whatever cheap takeout I could afford that week. The isolation from my family had become a dull ache rather than an acute pain, something I carried but no longer let define my daily existence. Everything changed the morning I received an email from someone claiming to represent my parents. The subject line read "Regarding Isabella Chen family matter," and my first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was some kind of scam. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message to find a formal introduction from someone named Patricia Williams, who identified herself as a family friend and art advisor. "Your parents have asked me to reach out because they're concerned about your well-being," the email began. "They've been following your career from a distance and want to rebuild your relationship. They've asked me to assess your work with the possibility of helping you find more commercial opportunities." I stared at the screen for several minutes, trying to process this unexpected development. After 3 years of minimal contact, during which my parents had made it clear they considered my artistic career a prolonged phase of self-destruction, they were suddenly interested in my work. The timing felt suspicious, especially since I had recently been featured in a small article about emerging Brooklyn artists that had been shared widely on social media. Patricia's credentials seemed impressive when I researched her online. She had worked with several established galleries and had written articles about art investment for financial publications. Her website featured testimonials from artists she had helped transition from struggling creators to commercially successful professionals. On the surface, everything appeared legitimate and potentially beneficial. When Patricia called me the following week, her voice carried the kind of professional warmth that put people at ease while maintaining appropriate boundaries. She explained that my parents had contacted her after seeing coverage of my work online, and they were eager to find ways to support my career while also ensuring I had financial stability. "They love you very much, Isabella," she said, and hearing those words after years of strained relationships made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "They realize they may have been too harsh in their initial reaction to your career choice, and they want to make amends. They've asked me to help you develop a more sustainable approach to your artistic practice." The phrase "more sustainable approach" should have been a warning sign, but I was so hungry for family connection and professional validation that I ignored my instincts. Patricia proposed a meeting where she could view my current work and discuss strategies for expanding my market presence. She offered to fly to New York at my parents' expense, another gesture that seemed to demonstrate their renewed commitment to supporting my dreams. Patricia arrived on a rainy Thursday morning in October, dressed in an elegant black coat and carrying a leather portfolio that projected serious professional intent. She was younger than I had expected, probably in her mid-30s, with the kind of polished appearance that comes from working with wealthy clients. Her enthusiasm for my work seemed genuine as she moved through my cramped studio, spending long minutes studying individual pieces and asking thoughtful questions about my creative process. "You have real talent," she said after reviewing my entire current inventory. "But talent alone isn't enough in today's art market. You need strategic positioning, consistent branding, and access to collectors who appreciate your particular aesthetic. That's where I can help." She outlined a comprehensive plan for elevating my career that sounded almost too good to be true. She would arrange for me to show my work at higher-profile venues, introduce me to collectors and curators who could advance my reputation, and help me develop a cohesive artistic statement that would resonate with serious buyers. In exchange, she would take a standard 30% commission on all sales she facilitated, plus a small monthly retainer to cover her ongoing advisory services. The monthly retainer was the part that made me hesitate. I was barely covering my basic expenses as it was, and adding another fixed cost to my budget seemed risky. But Patricia assured me that the investment would pay for itself within a few months through increased sales and higher prices for my work. "Think of it as hiring a business manager," she explained. "Every successful artist needs someone handling the commercial aspects of their career so they can focus on creating. Your parents understand this, which is why they're willing to cover the retainer for the first 6 months as a gift to help launch this new phase of your career." The fact that my parents were willing to invest money in my artistic career felt like a fundamental shift in our relationship. For years they had refused to provide any financial support for what they considered an impractical pursuit. Now they were offering to pay for professional representation, finally acknowledging that my art might be a legitimate business rather than an expensive hobby. I signed Patricia's contract without having it reviewed by a lawyer, a decision I would later regret deeply. At the time I was so excited about the possibility of family reconciliation and professional advancement that I didn't want to delay the process with legal complications. The contract seemed straightforward, giving Patricia exclusive representation rights for my work in exchange for her marketing and sales services. Within weeks of signing, Patricia arranged for me to participate in several group exhibitions at galleries I had been trying to get into for years. The venues were impressive, located in prestigious neighborhoods and frequented by serious collectors. My paintings were professionally photographed and featured in glossy catalogs alongside work by more established artists. The increased exposure led to my first significant sales in months. Patricia's connections in the collector community resulted in 3 paintings selling at prices higher than I had ever achieved before. For the first time since moving to New York, I felt like I might actually be building a sustainable career as an artist rather than simply surviving from month to month. The success made me more willing to trust Patricia's guidance about the direction of my work. She suggested that I focus on developing a more consistent style that would be easier for collectors to recognize and categorize. My recent paintings had been experimental, incorporating different techniques and exploring various themes, but Patricia felt this diversity was confusing to potential buyers. Collectors want to know what they're getting when they invest in an artist, she explained during one of our monthly strategy meetings. Think of artists like brands. The most successful ones develop a signature style that becomes immediately identifiable. That's what we need to create for you. Her advice made business sense, even though it felt artistically limiting. I began focusing on a series of paintings that combined elements from my most popular previous works, creating pieces that were technically accomplished but less personally meaningful than my earlier experimental work. The new paintings sold well, validating Patricia's commercial instincts while leaving me feeling increasingly disconnected from my own creative process. The breakthrough moment came when Patricia arranged for me to meet Rebecca Thompson, a prominent collector who had been acquiring work by emerging Asian American artists. Rebecca's collection was featured regularly in art publications, and having her purchase one of my paintings would significantly elevate my profile in the contemporary art world. The meeting took place at Rebecca's Upper East Side apartment, a stunning space filled with museum-quality works by artists I had studied and admired throughout my career. As we discussed my paintings, Rebecca demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of contemporary art movements and the cultural conversations my work was engaging with. Your paintings speak to something important about identity and place in contemporary America, Rebecca said as we stood in front of the piece she was considering purchasing. But I feel like you're still finding your voice. The work shows technical skill and cultural awareness, but I'm not seeing the emotional depth that would make these pieces truly compelling. Her feedback was more honest than I had received in months. Patricia's focus on commercial viability had led her to praise everything I created, as long as it fit the marketable formula we had established. Rebecca's critique reminded me of the kind of substantive artistic discourse I had missed since leaving graduate school. After Rebecca decided not to purchase the painting, Patricia was frustrated with what she saw as my failure to close an important sale. You were too honest about your artistic process, she criticized during our debrief. Collectors don't want to hear about your struggles or uncertainties. They want to feel like they're investing in someone who has already figured everything out. The gap between Patricia's commercial approach and my artistic instincts was becoming impossible to ignore. She wanted me to create work that would appeal to the broadest possible market, while I felt increasingly drawn to more personal and experimental directions. The monthly retainer payments, now coming from my own limited resources since my parents' initial support period had ended, felt like a burden rather than an investment. My relationship with my family during this period was superficially improved but fundamentally unchanged. We spoke more frequently, but our conversations focused entirely on my career progress as measured by sales figures and exhibition opportunities. My parents seemed pleased that I was finally taking a professional approach to my art, but they still didn't engage with the actual content of my work or understand what drove me to create. During a visit home for Christmas that year, I showed my family some of my recent paintings, hoping to share the artistic growth I had experienced since our last extended time together. My father studied the works with the same analytical approach he used for reviewing financial documents, noting technical improvements and asking about the commercial prospects for each piece. Patricia seems to be having a positive influence on your career, he observed. These paintings look more professional than your earlier work. More like something people would actually want to hang in their homes. My mother nodded in agreement, though I could tell she was still uncomfortable with the subject matter of some pieces. The colors are prettier in these newer ones, she said, pointing to a painting that Patricia had encouraged me to make more decorative and less challenging than my original concept. My sister Sarah, now pregnant with her second child, tried to bridge the gap between artistic and practical perspectives. I can see how much your technique has improved, she offered diplomatically. And it must feel good to finally be making some money from your art. None of them asked about the meaning behind the paintings or the personal experiences that had inspired them. They evaluated my work entirely in terms of professional advancement and financial success, missing the deeper questions about identity, displacement, and cultural memory that drove my creative process. The conversation that would ultimately shatter our tentative reconciliation happened during a family dinner on New Year's Eve. My father, perhaps emboldened by wine and the traditional occasion for reflection, decided to share his true feelings about my artistic career and the changes he had observed over the past year. "I have to admit, Isabella, I was skeptical when you first insisted on pursuing art," he began, raising his glass in what seemed like a toast. "But watching you work with Patricia has shown me that you can approach creativity like a business. You're finally producing art that people actually want to buy rather than just expressing your personal feelings on canvas." The backhanded compliment stung more than his previous outright disapproval. He was praising me for abandoning exactly the aspects of my work that had made it meaningful and authentic. Patricia's influence had pushed me toward creating commercially viable pieces that looked like art but didn't emerge from genuine artistic impulses. My mother joined the conversation with her own observations. "The new paintings are so much more accessible than your earlier work. I never really understood those dark, complicated pieces you used to make. These newer ones are something I could actually enjoy looking at every day." What they interpreted as artistic maturation, I was beginning to recognize as creative compromise. The work I had been making under Patricia's guidance was technically proficient but emotionally hollow, designed to appeal to market preferences rather than express authentic artistic vision. The breaking point in my relationship with Patricia came several months later when she proposed a major exhibition opportunity that would require me to create an entirely new body of work according to her specifications. A gallery owner she knew was planning a show called East Meets West featuring Asian American artists, and he was looking for pieces that would appeal to collectors interested in cultural themes. "This could be your breakthrough moment," Patricia explained excitedly. "The gallery has a strong collector base, and the theme is perfect for your background. We just need to make sure your pieces fit what they're looking for." She handed me a detailed brief outlining the preferred subject matter, color palette, and even the ideal size for paintings in the exhibition. The specifications felt like a corporate assignment rather than an artistic opportunity, designed to produce decorative objects that would match predetermined interior design schemes. What if I wanted to explore different themes or use techniques that don't fit these parameters? I asked, hoping she would encourage me to maintain some creative autonomy. Patricia's response revealed the fundamental difference in how we viewed my artistic practice. "Isabella, you need to think strategically about your career," she said with the patient tone she used when explaining obvious business principles. "This exhibition could establish you in the market segment where you have the best chance of long-term success. Personal expression is a luxury you can afford once you've built financial stability." That evening I sat in my studio surrounded by canvases that represented 2 years of Patricia's influence on my work. The paintings were accomplished and commercially successful, but they felt disconnected from the artistic journey that had brought me to New York in the first place. I had gained financial stability and family approval at the cost of creative authenticity. I decided to terminate my contract with Patricia, a decision that required me to forfeit the deposit I had paid for her services and face the prospect of rebuilding my career without her connections. When I called to inform her of my decision, her reaction was immediate and harsh. "You're making a huge mistake," she warned. "Do you realize how difficult it will be to find another representative after breaking a contract? And your parents are going to be devastated that you're throwing away everything we've accomplished together." Her mention of my parents confirmed what I had begun to suspect about the true nature of our professional relationship. Patricia hadn't discovered my work independently or been impressed by my artistic potential. She had been hired by my family to redirect my career toward more conventional and financially secure directions. The confrontation with my parents that followed was even more painful than our previous arguments because it revealed the depth of their deception and continued lack of faith in my artistic judgment. When I called to tell them about my decision to leave Patricia's representation, their response was immediate and angry. "Patricia called us," my father said without preamble. "She told us you terminated your contract against her professional advice. After everything we've invested in your career, this is how you repay our support." The word invested carried implications that made my stomach turn. "Did you hire Patricia to change the direction of my work?" I asked directly. The silence that followed answered my question before my mother finally spoke. "We wanted you to have professional guidance," she said defensively. "Patricia has experience helping artists build sustainable careers. We thought she could help you focus your talents in more productive directions." My father was more blunt. "Your earlier work was too weird, too personal. Nobody wants to buy paintings that make them uncomfortable or confused. Patricia understood that you needed to create art that people could actually live with." The revelation that my family had orchestrated my professional relationship with Patricia, using it as a tool to control and redirect my artistic development, felt like a deeper betrayal than their previous attempts to push me toward conventional careers. They had pretended to support my artistic dreams while secretly working to undermine the very aspects of my work that made it meaningful. The argument that followed covered years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding. My parents felt that I was ungrateful for their efforts to help me succeed and unwilling to accept practical guidance about building a career. I felt manipulated and infantilized, treated like a child whose artistic instincts couldn't be trusted. "We love you, Isabella," my mother said during a particularly heated moment. "But sometimes love means protecting people from their own poor judgment. Your art is beautiful, but it's not going to support you financially unless you make it more appealing to normal people." "Normal people," I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air between us. "You mean people who don't understand or appreciate authentic artistic expression, people who want decorative objects rather than meaningful art." My father's voice rose to levels I hadn't heard since high school. "Meaningful to who? To a handful of pretentious critics who will never buy your work. You need to grow up and recognize that art is a business like any other business. Success means giving customers what they want, not indulging your personal obsessions." The conversation ended with both sides feeling hurt and misunderstood, but this time the break felt permanent rather than temporary. My parents had revealed that their support was conditional on my willingness to abandon the artistic integrity that defined my work. They wanted me to be successful, but only according to their definition of success. After ending my relationship with Patricia and cutting ties with my family's attempts to control my career, I faced the challenge of rebuilding my artistic practice from scratch. The work I had created under her influence felt contaminated by commercial considerations, technically accomplished but creatively inauthentic. I spent several months creating experimental pieces that deliberately rejected everything Patricia had taught me about market appeal. The paintings were darker, more complex, and more personally meaningful than anything I had made in years. I explored themes of family betrayal, cultural displacement, and the tension between artistic integrity and commercial success. The new work was deeply satisfying to create but impossible to sell through traditional channels. The galleries Patricia had introduced me to were no longer interested in representing pieces that didn't fit their commercial expectations. My brief taste of financial stability evaporated, and I was back to working multiple jobs to cover basic expenses. But something had changed in my relationship with my artistic practice. The period of creating commercially driven work had taught me to recognize the difference between authentic expression and calculated appeal. I now had a clearer understanding of what compromises I was willing to make and which aspects of my artistic vision were non-negotiable. The isolation from family support, while emotionally difficult, also provided creative freedom I had never fully experienced before. Without the pressure to create work that would meet their approval or Patricia's commercial standards, I felt free to explore subjects and techniques that truly interested me. During this period of artistic rebuilding, I created what would later become the most important series of my career. The paintings combined traditional Chinese ink techniques with contemporary American materials, exploring themes of cultural memory and generational trauma through layered imagery that required close examination to fully appreciate. The series was intensely personal, incorporating family photographs, letters, and documents that I translated into abstract visual elements. Each painting told part of a larger story about immigration, assimilation, and the cost of cultural preservation across generations. The work was challenging and sometimes uncomfortable, exactly the kind of art my parents had wanted me to stop making. As I worked on the series, I realized I was creating not just individual paintings, but a cohesive artistic statement about identity, family, and the immigrant experience in America. The pieces worked together to create a visual narrative that was more powerful than any single work could achieve alone. I had no idea that this series, born from artistic crisis and family rejection, would eventually become the collection that would transform my life and finally prove that authentic artistic expression could be both meaningful and valuable. But at the time I was simply an artist in Brooklyn, working alone in my cramped studio, driven by nothing more than the need to create work that felt true to my experience and vision. The months following my break with Patricia and my family were the most financially difficult period of my adult life, but also the most creatively fertile. Without external pressure to create commercially viable work, I rediscovered the joy and urgency that had initially drawn me to art. Every brushstroke felt intentional and necessary. Every color choice emerged from genuine artistic instinct, rather than market calculation. I was painting my way back to myself, one canvas at a time, unknowing that the museum world was about to take notice of exactly the kind of authentic, challenging work my family had begged me to stop creating. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March while I was mixing paint for my latest piece. I almost didn't answer because the number was unfamiliar, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Miss Chen, this is Dr. Amanda Foster from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time." I nearly dropped the phone. The Metropolitan Museum of Art didn't call struggling Brooklyn artists on random Tuesday mornings. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of mistake or elaborate prank. "I'm calling because we've become aware of your work through several sources, and we're very interested in discussing a potential acquisition. Would it be possible to schedule a studio visit?" My hands were shaking as I tried to process what I was hearing. Dr. Foster explained that she was the curator of contemporary Asian art, and that my paintings had come to her attention through a network of collectors and gallery professionals who had been quietly following my career development. "We're particularly interested in your recent series exploring cultural memory and generational trauma," she continued. "The work demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of traditional techniques while addressing contemporary themes in ways we haven't seen before." I looked around my cluttered studio, trying to imagine a curator from the Met standing among my half-finished canvases and paint-stained furniture. The space was barely suitable for my own work, let alone receiving one of the most important art professionals in the country. Dr. Foster must have sensed my hesitation because she quickly added, "We understand that working artists often have spaces that aren't set up for formal presentations. What matters to us is the work itself, not the environment where it's created." We scheduled the studio visit for the following Thursday, giving me a week to prepare both practically and emotionally for what could be the most important meeting of my artistic career. I spent the intervening days organizing my space, researching Dr. Foster's background, and trying to understand how my work could have reached the attention of such a prestigious institution. Dr. Foster arrived exactly on time, accompanied by a younger colleague she introduced as Marcus Rivera, a fellow curator specializing in contemporary American art. Both were dressed professionally, but not formally, and their enthusiasm for my work was evident from the moment they entered the studio. "These are extraordinary, Dr." Foster said as she moved slowly through the space, studying each painting with the careful attention I had seen her give to masterpieces in museum galleries. "The way you're integrating traditional Chinese techniques with contemporary American materials creates a visual dialogue that's both historically informed and completely current." Marcus was particularly drawn to a large painting that incorporated family photographs into an abstract landscape, creating layers of meaning that revealed themselves gradually as viewers spent time with the piece. "This work requires contemplation," he observed. "It rewards careful looking in ways that much contemporary art doesn't." What impressed me most about their visit was the depth of their engagement with the conceptual framework underlying the series. Unlike Patricia, who had focused entirely on commercial appeal, and unlike my family, who had wanted the work to be more decorative, Dr. Foster and Marcus understood that the challenging aspects of my paintings were features, not bugs. "Art should provoke thought and emotion," Dr. Foster explained as we discussed the themes running through my work. "The best pieces don't provide easy answers, but instead open up new questions about identity, history, and human experience. Your paintings accomplish that beautifully." After spending nearly 3 hours examining my work and discussing my artistic development, Dr. Foster made an offer that exceeded my wildest dreams. The Metropolitan Museum wanted to acquire not just one or two pieces, but the entire series of 12 paintings exploring cultural memory and family history. We see this as a cohesive artistic statement that should be preserved and presented as a complete work, she explained. Breaking up the series would diminish its impact and meaning. We're prepared to offer $2.8 million for the collection, which would be the largest single acquisition of work by an emerging artist in our contemporary department's history. The number was so large that I had trouble processing it. I had been selling individual paintings for a few $1,000s when I could find buyers at all. The idea that my work could be worth nearly $3 million to one of the world's most prestigious museums seemed impossible to believe. Dr.
Foster continued with details that made the offer even more meaningful. The museum planned to feature the series in a solo exhibition the following year, with a full catalog featuring essays by prominent art historians, placing my work in the context of contemporary Asian American art. They also wanted to acquire additional pieces as I created them, establishing an ongoing relationship that could support my career for years to come. We believe you're creating some of the most important work being done by artists of your generation, Marcus added. This acquisition is an investment in the future of American art, not just a recognition of what you've already accomplished. After they left, I sat alone in my studio trying to comprehend what had just happened. In the span of a single afternoon, my life had been transformed from struggling artist to museum-collected professional. The validation was overwhelming, but more important than the money was the institutional recognition that my work had significant cultural value. That evening, I called my best friend from graduate school, Elena, who was now working as a curator in Los Angeles. When I told her about the Met's offer, her excited screams were so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Isabella, do you realize what this means?" she practically shouted. "The Met doesn't make acquisition offers like this unless they believe an artist's work will be studied and valued for decades to come. This isn't just about current success, it's about art historical significance." Elena helped me understand the broader implications of the museum's interest in my work. Major acquisitions by institutions like the Met typically led to increased attention from other museums, galleries, and collectors. The solo exhibition would be reviewed by important critics and visited by art world professionals from around the world. "You need to call your family," Elena urged. "Whatever happened between you, they need to know about this. It might help them finally understand what you've been working toward all these years." But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. The wounds from my family's attempts to control my artistic development were still fresh, and I needed time to process this vindication before subjecting it to their inevitable attempts to diminish or redirect its significance. Instead, I spent the evening walking through my neighborhood, trying to understand how dramatically my circumstances had changed. The same streets I had walked countless times while worrying about rent money and art supplies now felt different, charged with possibility and validation I had never dared to hope for. The news of the Met's acquisition spread quickly through the art world. Within days of signing the agreement, I received calls from gallery directors who had previously ignored my submissions, collectors who wanted to commission work, and journalists requesting interviews about my artistic journey. The attention was gratifying but also overwhelming. Suddenly everyone wanted to know about the struggling Brooklyn artist who had caught the Met's attention, and I found myself telling my story repeatedly to people who seemed fascinated by the narrative of artistic perseverance rewarded. One interview request came from a reporter at Art News, one of the most widely read publications in the contemporary art world. The article would be my first major media coverage, and I knew it could significantly impact how my work was perceived and discussed going forward. During the interview, the reporter asked about my family's reaction to the museum acquisition. It was a natural question given the story I had been telling about my artistic development, but it forced me to confront the conversation I had been avoiding. "Actually, they don't know about it yet," I admitted. "My family and I have had some complicated disagreements about my career choices over the years." The reporter pressed for more details, clearly sensing that there was an interesting personal story behind my professional success. I found myself explaining the years of conflict, the attempts to push me toward more conventional careers, and the recent manipulation through Patricia's representation. "So your family tried to convince you to stop making exactly the kind of work that the Met is now acquiring?" she asked, clearly fascinated by the irony.
They wanted me to create art that would be more commercially appealing and less challenging, I confirmed. They couldn't understand why I insisted on exploring difficult themes or using techniques that required viewers to engage more deeply with the work. The article, when it was published the following month, presented my story as a vindication of artistic integrity over commercial compromise. The headline read, "Against All Odds, How Isabella Chen's Refusal to Compromise Led to Met Acquisition," and it positioned my success as a victory for authentic artistic expression. Reading the article forced me to confront how my family would react when they inevitably learned about my museum success through media coverage, rather than direct communication from me. The story made their opposition to my artistic career seem short-sighted and controlling, which was accurate but would undoubtedly be painful for them to see in print. The call from my mother came 3 days after the article was published online. Her voice was tight with emotion when I answered the phone, and I could tell she had been crying. "Isabella, we saw the article," she said without preamble. "Is it true? Did the Metropolitan Museum really buy your paintings for nearly $3 million? I confirmed that the article was accurate, and the silence that followed was longer than any pause in our previous conversations. When my mother finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us? Why did we have to learn about the biggest success of your career from reading it online?" Her pain was evident, and I felt a stab of guilt about excluding them from this moment. Despite everything that had happened between us, they were still my parents, and this achievement was partly built on the foundation they had provided through my childhood and education. "I wasn't sure how you would react," I admitted. "The last time we spoke about my art, you made it clear that you thought my work was too weird and uncommercial. I didn't know if you would see this as vindication or as a fluke." My father got on the phone, and his voice carried a mix of pride and confusion that I had never heard before. "Isabella, I don't understand how we got this so wrong. We were trying to protect you from making career choices that would leave you struggling financially. We never imagined that your art could be valued at this level." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had about my artistic career. For the first time, my parents asked detailed questions about my work, wanting to understand what the museum curators had seen in the paintings they had previously dismissed as too challenging or personal. My mother was particularly interested in the cultural themes I had explored in the Acquired series. "We never talked much about your grandparents' immigration experience when you were growing up," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much those family stories had influenced your art." My father struggled more with understanding the artistic merit of work that didn't conform to his expectations of what paintings should look like. But the Met's acquisition had forced him to reconsider his assumptions about art's value and meaning. "I still don't completely understand your paintings," he said, honestly. "But clearly people who know much more about art than I do see something important in them. I was wrong to dismiss your work without trying to understand what you were trying to accomplish." The conversation ended with both sides acknowledging the pain that had been caused by years of misunderstanding and mutual disappointment. My parents apologized for their attempts to control my artistic development, and I apologized for shutting them out of this recent success. "We're proud of you, Isabella," my mother said before we hung up. "We should have said that years ago, but we were so focused on our fears about your financial security that we couldn't see how talented and dedicated you really were." My father added his own apology. "I called your art worthless trash because I was afraid you would waste your life on something that wouldn't support you. I was wrong about the art, and I was wrong about your ability to build a career around your talents." The family reconciliation that followed was gradual and sometimes awkward, but it was built on a more honest foundation than our previous relationship had been. My parents made genuine efforts to understand my work and artistic goals, while I tried to appreciate their fears and concerns even when I disagreed with their conclusions. My sister Sarah was the most openly excited about my museum success. "I always loved your paintings," she confessed during a phone call. "I just didn't know how to talk about them because Mom and Dad were so worried about your career prospects. But I'm not surprised that experts recognized how special your work is." Michael's reaction was more complicated. As the sibling who had followed the conventional path my parents preferred, my artistic success seemed to challenge some of his assumptions about career choices and risk management. But he was ultimately supportive, even if he didn't fully understand how my unconventional choices had led to such dramatic validation. The Met exhibition opening 6 months later was a surreal culmination of my artistic journey. Walking through galleries filled with my paintings, surrounded by family, friends, and art world professionals, I felt a deep sense of completion that went beyond professional success. My parents attended the opening, dressed formally and clearly proud to be associated with the evening's honoree. Watching them move through the galleries, reading wall texts that explained the cultural and historical significance of my work, I could see them trying to understand not just my paintings but the artistic vision that had driven me to create them. Dr. Foster gave a brief speech about the acquisition, explaining why the museum had been drawn to my work and how it fit into the broader context of contemporary American art. Hearing my paintings described as essential documents of the immigrant experience and sophisticated meditations on cultural identity by one of the country's leading curators was validation. The reviews of the exhibition were overwhelmingly positive, with critics praising both the individual strength of the paintings and the power of presenting them as a complete series. Several reviewers specifically mentioned the way my work challenged viewers to think more deeply about family, memory, and cultural preservation. More importantly, the exhibition led to additional museum acquisitions and gallery representation at the highest levels of the art world. Within a year of the Met purchase, my work was included in major exhibitions across the country, and I was earning enough from my art to focus exclusively on creating without worrying about survival jobs. The financial security was wonderful, but the real victory was the validation of my artistic choices. Every major institution and critic who engaged with my work confirmed what I had always believed, that authentic artistic expression was more valuable than commercial compromise. That challenging art could find its audience, and that staying true to my vision had been the right choice even when it seemed impossible. Looking back on the journey from family rejection to museum acquisition, I realized that the opposition I had faced had actually strengthened my work by forcing me to clarify what was most important to me as an artist. The years of isolation and financial struggle had been difficult, but they had also been essential to developing the authentic voice that ultimately attracted institutional recognition. My relationship with my family settled into something healthier than it had ever been before. They learned to appreciate aspects of my work they had previously dismissed, while I learned to understand their fears without letting those fears control my artistic decisions. We found ways to support each other that didn't require anyone to abandon their core values or beliefs. The success also allowed me to mentor other artists who were facing similar conflicts between family expectations and artistic ambitions. I established a small grant program for emerging artists whose work addressed themes of cultural identity and family history, hoping to provide the kind of support I had needed during my most difficult periods. Today, my paintings hang in some of the world's most prestigious museums, and my work is studied by art historians and students who see it as part of an important conversation about identity and belonging in contemporary America. The critical recognition has been gratifying, but the real satisfaction comes from knowing that I stayed true to my artistic vision despite enormous pressure to compromise. The girl who mixed colors on makeshift palettes, while her parents worried about her impractical dreams, had become an artist whose work was considered essential to understanding our cultural moment. The journey had been longer and more difficult than I had ever imagined, but every challenge had been worth it for the opportunity to create art that mattered. My parents never fully understood my paintings, but they learned to trust my judgment about their value and significance. More importantly, they learned that supporting someone sometimes means accepting choices you don't completely understand, and that love sometimes requires faith in another person's vision of their own life. The Metropolitan Museum acquisition was just the beginning of a career that has continued to grow and evolve, but it represented something more than professional success. It was proof that authentic artistic expression will find its audience, that institutions recognize and preserve work that speaks honestly about human experience, and that staying true to your vision is always the right choice, even when the path forward seems impossible to navigate. Standing in that museum gallery, surrounded by my paintings and the people who had finally learned to see their value, I understood that art had given me everything I had ever wanted, not just success or recognition, but the ability to create something meaningful and lasting from the complexity of my own experience and the experiences of my community. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.